that brings up the question about the collation work that you're doing on the Pericope Adulterae. So the big question, I'm sure, on everybody's mind is, when are you going to release that?
Yesterday, if I could. There still could be more manuscripts discovered, which I would add to the database at any point. But just working with what material I have, right now, Joey McCollum, who is now doing his doctorate in Australia under Stephen Carlson, is going over my collation data and checking some of those that I had marked having questionable readings, questionable only in the sense that they were very difficult to discern on usually blurry microfilms that happen to be over in Germany at the INTF in Münster. He's trying to recheck them in light of certain new photographs that have been made by various libraries or by Dan Wallace's Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. He sends me back the data that he finds on these and his suggestions, and most of them tend to be correct because I didn't have the opportunity when in Münster to work from anything but black and white microfilms on a very ancient microfilm reader that dated way back to the 1950s. So the work is continuing with this checking and rechecking. And if we ever get through all of this rechecking, then I think it'll be ready for publication. And the best news, since I'm not a computer programmer and know nothing about how to do formatting and that, Joey McCollum is reformatting all of my data into a form that would be the similar, if not identical, to the Editio Critica Maior volumes that have been coming out from Münster.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's interesting hearing you tell me about your work there, because I was a software developer before I moved into the pastorate. And with computer software, you don't really finish. You just kind of stop working on it, right? It sounds like that's what's going to happen with the Pericope Adulterae. You're not going to necessarily be finished per se, but you'll have to stop working on it at some point, right? Let's talk a little bit about preservation. Matthew 5:18, we've talked a lot about it on my channel. That's the infamous jots and tittles verse. And then Psalm 12:6-7. Again, that's the words of the Lord are pure words as if refined in a fire 7 times. What's your view of these passages, and how does that work into preservation and what you're doing with the Byzantine text?
I think that most of the passages that tend to be quoted on preservation seem to be quoted from those coming from the TR only or the King James only camp. I think that a more balanced view of preservation, they try to turn it into a doctrine of preservation from these texts. But for example, Psalm 12:6-7 read correctly from the Hebrew does not even suggest that it's the words that will be preserved forever. It is the poor and the needy that will be preserved forever. So you just can't take a scripture out of context or somehow twist or reapply it and suddenly say this is now the basis for a doctrine. I think we have is a preservation that has taken place, and usually the word is providential preservation. These scriptures have been preserved through history. And as we talked about earlier, we really have one single text that has been preserved, which is the autograph.
Yeah.
The autograph has these different clusters that have moved off, showing their differences, whether Alexandrian, Western, Caesarean, or Byzantine clusters. But again, if we're talking about at least 94% of their text being identical, we have preservation. And the issue is trying to establish at the points of difference between the text, and based on whatever theory is being followed, which one then would best represent the autographs.
When you did your schooling to become a textual critic, you started off with the modern critical text ideology and all that stuff, and then shifted over into a more Byzantine position. So how long were you a critical text guy before you had made the conclusion or made the switch to a Byzantine text form?
I started reading, as I said, Metzger and Greenlee, so it was in my undergraduate time, and basically it was coming from sometime in late 1966, early 1967, until approximately 1976. When I did my master's thesis for the THM at Southeastern Seminary, and I finished that in 1975, I did not even at that point advocate a Byzantine priority theory. I did suggest that maybe the Byzantine had some things to contribute because that was a result going on from my studies with Clark, but I had not yet taken a firm stand in that thesis on the Byzantine position. It was only after more study with Clark and then getting connected with Pierpont that I actually moved over to that position. Otherwise, I was a practicing eclectic. I know the presuppositions, I know the arguments, and I can practice eclecticism, reasoned eclecticism from a critical text standpoint on any passage you want. I just don't do it anymore.
So now when you switched over to be a Byzantine guy, that's what we say here, a Byzantine guy, what was it like after that period? What was it like in academia where it was sort of, the majority position was reasoned eclecticism, and you're now here, you're like one of the only what was that like for you?
It's recognized this position's a minority position. If you polled all the critical scholars, the text critics, and even the other New Testament scholars who are not themselves primarily textual critics, you're going to find that the Byzantine text position is down in the probably 1% or less position of advocacy. So I recognize this. I know I'm in the minority, and I know others that hold that position are in the minority as well. That's not a surprise to me because everything from the critical text position has been dominant, especially since the time of Westcott and Hort. There were earlier predecessors, of course, but Westcott and Hort really set the critical text ball into motion, and the Nessel editions have perpetuated it, even though they were combined from originally 3 different editions, and then later everything was thoroughly revised in the 26th edition and 27th and 28th. But the text, as pointed out, still resembles, even in the Nessel 28, the Westcott-Hort text more than any other edition.
So what were some of the challenges that you faced while you were writing your papers and such as a minority Byzantine guy?
Well, I had no challenges at all when I was doing my Master of Theology paper. That was not a problem because I didn't take the Byzantine position, although I already had that when I was doing the doctoral study. My major professor, James Brooks, definitely was not in favor of the Byzantine text position. I took another seminar with another professor who no longer is at Southwestern Seminary. That other professor basically was not happy with my participation in the seminar for holding a Byzantine text position, and it was verbally berated, if you like, that, this position is one of ignorance or whatever. So that professor had a strong view on it. Again, I ignored it. I presented my paper. My paper, by the way, in that doctoral seminar was on von Soden's edition, and whether or not it could be legitimately used to establish at least a backbone for the Byzantine text. My major professor didn't agree, but he didn't care as long as I didn't write a dissertation on the Byzantine text. My dissertation was not Byzantine, it was on scribal habits among manuscripts of the Apocalypse.
Right.
And all that dealt with was the different errors that scribes would make over the centuries as they copied the book of Revelation.
So now in regards to like research and academics with the Byzantine text form, where does it stand now and what's happening with the future of it?
Well, you've seen sort of a revolution in critical text thinking that they have now moved to a position that the Byzantine text does have something to contribute toward establishing the original text. Not wholly, of course, but it does have its contribution to make, whereas back when you had, for example, Kurt Aland, who was director of the Institute, who would have no use whatsoever for the Byzantine text, now, especially with the studies of Klaus Wachtel, who did his dissertation on the Byzantine text, you do have a movement that is allowing the Byzantine text to have at least some voice, but it's not like it's turning over the entire critical text. It's just saying more and more Byzantine readings are finally being accepted, even though there's still a very small minority. And you see this reflected in at least the Catholic epistles in the Nessel 28 edition, and also as it's moved on into the book of Acts and the Gospel of Mark in the Editio Critica Maior.
And so if you were to like meet somebody on the street who barely knew anything about textual criticism, he just knew there was kind of like maybe this debate thing going on or something, simplified greatly, what would you say are the best arguments for the Byzantine text type?
Basically, the strongest argument is still it was the text that was accepted and transmitted in general. I mean, not to the minor specifics, But for this large percentage, and within Byzantine alone, remember I said that would take 99%. So if we've got the Byzantine manuscripts that are going to be running at this large percentage through history from at least the 4th century onward, because as I said, Westcott and Hort even admitted the Byzantine text was dominant from that point onward till the invention of printing, and even beyond that actually. But you have this historical transmission and dominance that existed among the Greek manuscript. And I think that's your strongest argument for the Byzantine text. If the Alexandrian text, for example, had been original, then why didn't it perpetuate?
Right.
Why did it die out? Probably more pertinent to today's reasoned eclecticism. Why would the original text now have to be pieced together from snippets that are from Alexandrian or Western or from Caesarean or from Byzantine, examples of which we can find throughout the Nessel edition?
All right. So one last question, Dr. Robinson. What's going to happen with majority/Byzantine text research? Is there someone to sort of carry the torch, as it were? Is there any leading charge on this?
I wish there were a lot of people that would do this. Again, I think people are going to have to be studying the issue, study it carefully. I recommend especially to read the numerous articles that I've written on it or the ETS papers that I've delivered and see if that might become convincing. I could start giving you a list of the articles, but there's too many to take note of at this point.
Right.
But certainly my case for Byzantine priority is an important article available on the internet, as well as the appendix to our 2005 edition, and also the one I did critical of the current Nessel Island text, the one on Island's Rule 9, which has appeared in a publication showing that the critical text at certain points actually has entire whole verses that have zero support from any manuscript, version, or father throughout history as part of what they claim is the original text. And I think this is eclecticism gone too far, which may be enough to convince some people. Now, as for whoever is going to follow, one person that has a good chance in this area is my former THM student, Jonathan Borland, who is now doing his doctorate at New Orleans Seminary.
Oh, very good.
I would hope that he can continue this work. There should be others coming up somewhere, but again, I don't know who they are. The ones that I did know that held to the Byzantine text position, the ones previously, most of these have been older and they've died. And I'm going to do that eventually, but I'm hoping not for the
That's right. That's right.
years, but that's another issue.
That's right. Well, Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for spending this time with me on the YouTube channel. Well, hopefully we can get together at some other time and do this. It was a wonderful experience to come and be able to talk to you for a little bit.
Certainly. Glad to do it, and anytime.
All right, brothers and sisters, until next time, we'll see you around.